Hi, and welcome back to Psychology Demystified with me, Dr. Karen. Today I'm going to be talking about relationships, and I'm going to be looking about 5 types of relationships that I know exist. And I'm going to have you try and evaluate what kind of relationship you have. And if it's going well, keep doing what you're doing. And if it's not going as well as you think it should, we're going to see if there's a way that we can turn it around. Now, in our desire to understand, manage, or untangle our relationships, we often find ourselves trying to view them through different lenses. And what happens when we do that is that we struggle to try and connect the dots. And we ask ourselves, is it me? Is it him? If there's been tension in the relationship over the past couple of weeks or days, then we try and see, is it because there was stress in the relationship? Or is this a sign of something bigger that I can't tell is brewing? Sometimes what we try and do is try and analyze and say, if we step back and do this, are they going to do this? Or if I stop doing this, will they stop doing that? And there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of self-doubt and a lot of thinking. But in order to truly make sense of the kind of union you have, you actually do have to look at the broader landscape of your relationship. And there are ways to do that as we examine the 5 different relationships that I know of. Of course, there are going to be others that I'm not going to mention. But out of the 5 that I talk about today, I would like you to really analyze which ones are good, because there are some that are not so good. And I think as I speak, you will get to understand where I'm going with it and try and see where yours falls. I'm going to start by talking about the active or passive relationship. In this kind of relationship, one partner, be it male or female, is essentially in charge and does most of the heavy lifting and takes off most of the responsibilities, while the other one in the relationship is passive and simply just goes along. Now, sometimes these relationships start off as a competitive relationship, but then one decides to take a back seat. However, in most cases, what happens is that this imbalance of one being active and one being passive usually starts off from the very beginning. Sometimes it starts on an equal footing and then someone just decides to just take a back seat and become passive. And sometimes it starts off as that imbalance from the very beginning. So there are 2 different ways this relationship could start. Now, in this kind of relationship, there are few arguments. But then what usually happens is that the active person starts to become resentful of the passive one. Because what happens is that they end up being the one to carry the load, and they feel that they're not getting enough appreciation for the things that they do. All they get is, talk, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, even though they're the ones who are carrying most of the load. What they hear is what they're not doing. And what happens is sometimes because they're conflict avoidant, they don't say anything until there's a sudden big blowout. And when there is a big blowout, then they explode. And then what usually happens though is that they end up feeling bad about exploding, and then they just go back to their role of being the active one, and the passive one just goes back to the passive role. Now, in order to fall into these roles, sometimes it's about personalities. And what usually happens is that, again, with psychology, some things have a history and some don't. Now, if there's a history, then this is what happens. In a relationship where there's an active and a passive one, what usually happens is that the one who's the active one is usually the one who starts off in childhood being the good child. They're the ones who are conflict avoidant, they're over-responsible, they are always keeping others happy, they solve problems, they are fixers. And then the passive one, who is like that from the beginning, is someone who is babied and spoiled and gets overwhelmed by anxiety, and then what happens is the adult in that person's life takes over and deals with it and solves it. So they grow up as an adult being the same way. They don't know how to deal with anything that induces angst. And as an adult, they start to lean on others, and they're very happy being in the passive role, and they're happy with someone just taking over. So that's how it happens when there is a personality aspect to it. Sometimes, though, the roles of active and passive have nothing to do with personalities, and they have more to do with someone having maybe a mental issue, or that's undetected or unrealized, or something like ADHD, and then the active person then is used to taking over and compensating for the passive person. Or sometimes it happens when someone out of the partnership, someone develops a chronic illness, and then the active person then has to take over and become the caretaker. So there are two different ways that this can develop. It's either through personalities or through circumstances. Now, I know you're wondering, is there a long-term risk for this kind of relationship? Yes, there is. Because what happens is that there is a risk of the active partner becoming burnt out, becoming resentful. There is a risk of the active partner becoming, just shutting down and deciding, I'm done, conflict stop, I don't want to deal. And in extreme cases, this partner could leave. So the active partner who's then left behind is either forced to then become independent and stop leaning on someone, or what they do instead is find a relationship maybe in future that ends up being the same dynamic because they're so used to being looked after that they only know a relationship where they're looked after. So it does have some long-term effects. Now, the next kind of relationship is one where you have competitive or controlling partners. And this is where there are two alphas. And these alphas are jockeying for power. And what happens with this relationship is that someone has to win the argument. Someone's career is more important. Whose standards do we follow? Whose rules do we follow in the house? Who gets the final say? Who makes the final decision about what house we buy? Who makes the decisions about the cars? And there's a lot of butting heads. So that means, of course, there are a lot of arguments in this kind of relationship. And that quickly turns into power struggles and battles over who gets in the last word. Because again, remember, these are people who are used to winning. So if they're used to winning, then someone has to get in the last word, and it better be me. And remember, this doesn't matter whether it's male or female. It could be either or, but there's a power struggle of some sort. In this kind of relationship, the emotional climate is tense. Needless to say, it is quite tense. And what happens is that because two personalities are battling for control, their self-esteem is based on winning a fight. So they're always fighting with each other. It's like two gladiators being in the ring. That's pretty much what this kind of relationship is, whether it's a marriage or a budding relationship or whatever it is, whether it's a man or a woman. They just want to be in charge, and they're less rigid. They're more rigid about what happens in the home. Not necessarily because it's important, but because they have to be the one who wins, and they have to be the one who's successful, and the one who just has the final say. In the end, what happens is that long term, this must be exhausting. So these couples get tired of battling, and oftentimes, and not always, oftentimes what you find is that unfortunately, there's either a conscious uncoupling or a divorce, because one just has to finally concede and say, I'm out. Time out. I'm not doing this anymore. And they just decide, I'm done. I need my own turf, and I need to be in charge somewhere else. And then it just doesn't work. Another kind of relationship is one where it's termed as aggressive/accommodating. And here the power difference is not based on caretaking. It's not like the active-passive relationship that I talked about where someone is always a caretaker. In this one, the relationship is simply based on raw power. It's just raw power and nothing else. So one partner is clearly in charge. You know it, you see it, you hear it, you feel it. And what happens is that the other partner, be it male or female, because again, I know the assumption is to assume that it's the man who's going to be in power all the time, but no, there's some women who take on this role. And they have raw power, and they instill fear in the other partner. And because of that fear, they become passive, and they take a step back because they don't want to butt heads with this person who is dominating the relationship. The intimidating partner usually easily blows up when there's an issue. And unfortunately, in this relationship, there's usually a very high level of emotional abuse, and sometimes it does turn physical. This relationship, the climate is a high tension climate, and one partner is always walking on eggshells. The dynamics is that the person who is in charge or sees themselves to be in charge is someone who is clearly a bully and has anger management issues that they have not dealt with. They may have grown up. If there's a personality part to it and a history to it, this kind of person may have grown up in a home where this was the dynamic. And they may have had an abusive parent who they learn to identify with. And because they learn to identify in that way, that is the way that they know. Is it an excuse? Absolutely not. But is it something that's in there? Yes. Underneath that, all of that facade of I'm the boss, sometimes what happens is that this person might have extremely high levels of anxiety and a fear of failure. And they believe that any opposition of what they're thinking is almost like a fight or a judgment of who they are and how they're succeeding. And that's why, of course, they're quick to react. Sometimes, of course, this person is just simply a narcissist and they just have little empathy for others and just want to be in control. Now, the accommodating partner sometimes is someone who also grew up in a home where either there was abuse or they grew up in a home where they were used to seeing one parent who was always intimidated, and they identified with that parent. And they learned that that was the way relationships work. You just have to be quiet and let things pass. It's a tricky place to be because this person seems to have a higher tolerance for really bad behavior. And these are the people who stay with someone who is abusing them, even when their friends are telling them, get out. It's because they don't know any other way. And it's what they're used to and it's what they know. So it's a tough one when someone is in this kind of relationship, or if you're in this kind of relationship. Because I'm sure if you are in this kind of relationship, you're wondering, why am I staying in this relationship if I know that it's going to be emotionally and physically abusive? But there are underlying issues to deal with at the same time. A lot of times why people, or why you will stay in a relationship that has this kind of balance is because, or imbalance, is because the person who is in charge is always showing you sporadic kindness. And they come in and they woo you and they show you that everything is going to be fine. And then it just flips. So then the person or you grow in this relationship believing that if you keep being nice, if you keep staying on balance, if you keep figuring out what the right steps to the dance that you're supposed to know is, then everything's going to be fine and they won't explode. But unfortunately, because the script keeps changing and you're not given a script to read off of, things will keep flipping. So no matter how much you dance, no matter how well you learn the steps, the script won't stay the same. So the behavior and the reaction that you get from the person who has a raw power is not always going to be positive. In the long term with this kind of relationship, what either happens is that the accommodating partner either finally gets the courage to leave, or the relationship just continues in that way until something drastic happens. And the aggressive partner will do whatever is necessary to try to pull the other back into the relationship, even if it means becoming nice for just a short period of time. The goal is never to let you leave. But if you do, what happens is that this aggressive partner will then find someone else to take your place and continue the abuse. So they just find someone else to replace you and continue doing what they were doing to you, to them. The next kind of relationship is one where people have disconnected or parallel lives. And in this one, there's actually little arguing. There's not much to argue about because they don't have much connection. And these couples will just go on autopilot, and both of them end up with their own routines. I do this, you do that. We meet at the end of the day. We have little in common. We have different friends. We have different hobbies. We are more roommates than lovers. And this kind of relationship, the climate is one that's boring and stale and little tension, and they're just courteous towards each other, but there's still some kind of coldness in there as well. And you can actually kind of detect that. Some couples actually fall into this type of relationship within several years. If they've been married for a while, but they married for the wrong reasons, either because they were having a child or because they wanted to have a child, and that was the person who was there at the time. And then whatever chemistry there was, because it wasn't enough, it fades pretty fast. And then any problems that they have are just swept under the rug because I don't have the energy or the need to actually fight with you because it's actually not much we have in common, so there's no need to fight. and there's just distance. Some people actually move into this relationship because they have mellowed with age. And what happens is that they just start growing old together and there's nothing that they have to talk about. Some couples get into this kind of relationship because they're child-centered. And now that the child has now left home, there's actually nothing to say because their conversations used to revolve around updates on the children, the weather, jobs, where is so-and-so going, Baba so-and-so, Mama so-and-so, how is, so-and-so doing in school. And because the kids are the ones who used to unite them, when the kids leave home, there's nothing to talk about. And with these kind of relationships, what you find is that when they hit midlife or when they're a lot older and the kids have left home, this is where you find couples who've been together for so many years end up divorcing or separating. And then you wonder, what? Where did this come from? It's because their relationship was the one where their commonality was the children. And now that the children are not there or don't need them anymore as much because they've moved on to their own homes, there's nothing for them to fix or to speak about. So sometimes these ones just die a natural death. And then, of course, there are those who just stay together just in the hope that the children will come home and unite them. Some of them actually just stay together because they feel that they're too old to change, so there's no need to. And then some just go their separate ways. The last kind of couple I'm going to talk about is the one that is accepting or balanced. This couple is able to work together as a team. They complement each other. One takes on one role, switches it around. If one is working and the other is not, they support each other, and sometimes they switch roles almost in a very fluid manner. And in a home like this, or in couples who are like this, you find that sometimes one will be working, sometimes one will not. It's a team. It's a seamless team, and they actually support each other's strengths and laugh about them because they know that some have strengths and some don't. So it's a very interesting dynamic. They've got each other's back. They're interested in what the other is doing. They're interested in helping each other. They lift each other up. They boost each other's egos. If one is in school, the other one is a cheerleader. If the relationship starts to feel like it's growing a little stale, they know how to pump some life into it so it doesn't go stale. They're able to solve problems. They don't sweep anything under the rug. This kind of relationship that I just talked about is one that's considered caring and relaxed. And I'm not saying that this couple doesn't fight. They do, but they know how to not go to bed angry. They may start out this way, or they may have come because, of course, they've watched their parents be in loving relationships that taught them how to be this way. However, there are some who have grown up in homes that maybe had any of the other relationships I mentioned and have then decided in adulthood to not repeat the pattern. So there are many reasons why a couple may decide to become this kind of accepting or balanced couple. It's because they've either watched it or they've watched something very contrary and decided that they do not want to repeat the pattern and want their children or just them to have a home that is different from any other of the other relationships that I mentioned. The third way that a couple could become accepting of each other is through therapy, because some couples realize that there's an issue, seek help, find positive ways to relate to each other, and then build the relationship of that. So the three ways I mentioned that a couple could become accepting is by either watching their parents be that way, deciding that they're going to change the pattern of the relationship that they saw their parents have because they grew up in a situation or a home that was not as positive and they don't want to repeat the patterns, or sometimes through therapy. Now, obviously, there are some relationships that I may have spoken about that sounded like they're bleak and they're bleak 24/7. That is so not true. Just keep in mind that it's not always going to be grim in those relationships. There are good times, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten into it in the first place. But just keep in mind that some definitely have more positive experiences than others. And it's up to you to see what it is that you want to keep in your relationship and what it is that you think you might want to. And I'm not going to use the word change. I mean turn around. Because when you turn around something, it means that you're actively trying to make it better. Not necessarily change your personality and who you are, because that will not last. So here comes the dilemma. How do you turn things around if you are in one of the relationships I talked about and you don't like the way it sounds when you hear me talk about it to you? The starting point is to be honest with yourself and to realize that there are things that you would like to turn around. The next step, of course, is to take active measures to change the dynamics of this relationship that you're not happy with. This generally means doing the complete opposite of what you're already doing, because what you're doing is not working. So switch it, do the opposite. That's how you turn it around. If you're the controlling or aggressive person, try and take on the more accommodating role. If you are the accommodating or the passive person, try and see if you can step up or become more assertive. If you're the one who's feeling like you're disconnected from your partner, be it male or female, then stop using avoidance, stop using distance to avoid conflict. Stop running away from the issues. Engage. Stop running on autopilot if that's what you're doing. Talk to someone. Talk about your problems. Stop sweeping them under the rug, because again, all they do is create something that you can trip over. They don't go away. Make an effort to connect. Make an effort. If you don't have any common interests, then try and find something that you like to do together. Try and see if you can find something in common that will keep you interested in each other and what you're doing. If you are in an abusive relationship, stop the magical thinking that something magical is going to happen and things are going to change. Define your boundaries, define where you stand, and then take steps to get out of it. Always remember that relationships are built on patterns. And these are patterns where each person bounces off the other. Each person feeds off the other. If you change the pattern of your relationship, that may also help you change the way you behave towards your partner. And your partner may also change the way he or she behaves towards you. Now, if you need help changing or turning your relationship around, therapy is always an option. So don't be scared of seeking therapy. Sometimes you're given positive tools to be able to turn things around. So seek it. You don't need to take what you're getting. You can take steps to change it. You can take steps to turn it around. Change is possible. And if it doesn't happen now, then when is it going to happen? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye.